The future has arrived. As the world and humanity itself moves faster and faster into unimaginable possibilities, old institutions that built connection and shaped our sense of meaning are falling by the wayside. In their wake, profound questions about ethics, our purpose, and spirituality demand new answers. Join your host, Scott Mason, in Season 2 of the Purpose Highway podcast. We will explore how these social changes will revolutionize our society. We will learn how they impact our own search for connection and meaning. And we will hear stories of influencers whose lives have had radical change from the inside and found profound connection to others and themselves through a new definition of meaning. The future has arrived. Are you ready?
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hello, everybody. It's Scott Mason, revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. And sitting with me today in the front seat is Josh Stewart. But to those of us watching or listening to this show, he's letting us in on something. He's also known as Stu. Stu is currently serving in the U.S. Air Force as a teacher of teachers, building and teaching communications courses from the ground up and helping others realize their impact on the world around them. And in a world that is getting smaller and smaller every day, that is something that means a lot. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I definitely appreciate it.
Thank you. Now, we're going to be talking about the show's big themes quite quickly. But we're going to start with a fun little game that I like to do with guests, and it's actually been quite illuminating so far. And that is, let's play the mythological spin wheel here. I'm going to ask you to name a Greek god or goddess that is your symbol or avatar, and then we're going to go from there into the meat. Who is yours, Josh? Who is yours, Stu? Josh, Stu, right. Stu, Josh.
Either one, all of it works. So a little bit of cheating here. I didn't have to spin the wheel too much. Selene. From Greek mythology, the moon goddess. Always loved that one. I don't know why I've always had like this thing with the moon, but I just always have. And when I found out like, oh, there's a moon goddess, I instantly gravitated towards that one. So Selene, the moon goddess.
And by the way, I'll share with folks, we had a pre-interview conversation. Now, Stu, you might have secretly hated me, but I was like, I felt like I had met a brother from another mother. And I raised that because my own mythological avatar is Helios, the god of the sun that was the brother of Selene. So we kind of actually are siblings here. Talk to me, though, a little about why Selene why she draws you to her.
Well, I've always been infatuated with the moon, first and foremost, just as a kid, because it's nighttime. You know, you're supposed to be scared of darkness. But Selene specifically, it's because there's just not much about her. And I kind of relate to that in my life. I'm one of those people that I'm working from the shadows, and no, not in a dark, bad way, right? But I'm one of those people that I want to be the support versus being out in front. And just with her not having much out there, it kind of feels like she's that, because other people take the spotlight from her, the other moon goddesses, but she's one of the main moon goddesses. So that's why how I relate to her, definitely.
She was known as a gentle goddess. The moonbeams were perceived as having something of a softness to them, as opposed to Helios, my avatar, where it's a big, bright thing that's everywhere. And I find that an interesting characterization of her, because there's subtlety involved. But I also find it interesting because you're in the military. And
That's right.
Until you just mentioned a minute ago, this idea of sort of being in the shadows or maybe being in the background a little bit as appealing to you, I couldn't exactly understand how a deity like Selene, representing something like the moon, could tie into someone who works for the military. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Currently, I am a master sergeant and I'm teaching, I'm instructing. And if you'd have met me, I'd say 5 years ago, and you said, hey, that guy's going to get in front of a bunch of people and teach, you would have said, no, not him, don't. Because I was one of those folks that if you put me in front of 1 or 2 people, I start sweating, my anxiety kicks in, and I didn't want to talk to people. So fast forward to, hey, you're going to be an instructor and I'm teaching large classrooms. And really, that to me does relate to Selene in a way, because yes, the moon is just a reflection of the sun's light. It's not really her light, the moonlight that's coming down. She's making something that you see during the day a lot softer and easier to digest, but the shadows are all around the whole time. And that's kind of how I feel. I will be in the classroom teaching, but my introvert hits me and I'm out for the count after that. And so I need that recharge time as well. So that it all kind of is like happening at night, I guess you could say. And so the moon being the big centerpiece of the evening, that really helps me relate to it a little bit more, I think.
Well, you're raising an interesting point that's going to come up a little bit more, I'm sure, during the conversation. I'll just sort of throw it out there now, which is the idea, for instance, again, going to our own polarity, which is the sun perhaps representing extroversion, the moon representing introversion, which you just described yourself as. And I'll never forget when I was a little boy, there was this book called Delairy's Book of Greek Myths. And I remember so vividly the page about, or the piece about Selene, but they had this double page, I believe it was black and white spread drawing, and it had Selene the moon on the top. And it talked about what was going on in the moonlight, these satyrs and nymphs dancing and all sorts of weird. Have you seen that picture? And do you remember that?
I've seen that picture. I haven't seen that book in a very long time, but I do remember that picture because obviously, right? Love Selene. But I love that. Love that.
One other thing that I'll talk about with regards to Selene, I'm curious as to whether you have any comments on, that goes as to the relative lack of myths about her, is the one big myth that everyone remembers. She fell in love with a man named Endymion. And Endymion was a shepherd. And she had a sister named Eos, who had fallen in love with another king or prince called Tithonus. And Eos had asked Zeus to make Tithonus, who was immortal, but she forgot to ask Zeus to give Tithonus eternal youth. So eventually, Tithonus grew so old, you know the story, right, that he turned into a cricket and she put him away in a closet somewhere. We're right today, chirping away. Now, Selene had a little bit more going on in her head than her sister. So she learned the lesson and she asked Zeus to give Endymion eternal youth. And he slept forever and ever and ever. Does that story mean anything to you, Josh?
It definitely does. When you think about nighttime and when you think about the moonlight, you talk about it being gentle, and then we talk about the relationship to being introverted as well. There's also like this kind of sadness there as well. And for me, that kind of relates to my personality. I was just telling a class yesterday, one of my, I guess, things that weigh over me a lot is that even in a room full of people, I'll feel completely alone.
Wow.
And I think that is similar to that story because she's there with someone she loves very much. They're asleep, but she's completely alone. There's nothing really
Wow.
she can do about it. Now they're asleep, so there's nothing they can say or do, and not that the people around me are asleep. That's not what I would say. But I think I can relate to that, being close to the people you love, but feeling alone at the same time.
There's a lot in that we're going to hit on a little bit later. But there's one final thing that I can't resist asking, and perhaps it's the most obvious of all. People associate the military with machismo.
Mm.
You are in the military. You're a career military person. You chose as your avatar a female. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That one is very personal because growing up, I had a strong male in the house, my father, but he, with all of his flaws, the big thing he was working all the time, out of town in construction usually. And I'm not saying anything bad about construction work. It helped me, helped our family go through, but he fell in with a bad group, put it that way.
Yeah.
My mother and my grandmother are basically the ones who raised me. And when I think about the moon goddess, the Selene, I think of the women around me. I have no issues with, because we'll talk about psychology, I'm sure later, there's the male and female just kind of living in the brain. And sometimes I feel like my conscience could be my grandmother sometimes. So it doesn't matter to me at all because what Selene signifies isn't just that feminine side. There's also more to it than that. So while it may be female, there's a lot more to it because we're more than just those bits that put us together that way. So that's kind of how I look at it. I think it's a really interesting question though, because no one's never really asked it to me that way. I haven't even thought about it. So yeah, and I think it relates to my grandmother for sure, and being raised that way.
Mm-hmm. I think that I felt compelled to ask it because we are living in an era of changing social norms. And we are in an era, and I'll just throw this out there as a personal feeling, you may very well disagree with me, where what is considered acceptable for a man to be, how he can view himself, and how he can express who and what he is internally, has been very polarized. On the one hand, you do see people really being open to embracing and open and without apology, expressing every bit of the gender, stereotypical gender beliefs inside of them without necessarily compromising their underlying gender identity. On the other hand, you see other people, I won't name any, going out of their way to suppress or heighten, particularly men, these, what I view as very superficial, almost chest-beating identifications of masculinity or markers of masculinity as substitutes or as a portrayal of who and what their entire masculine identity is. I'll just throw out here, and you may or may not be able to comment on this, but I will just throw this out right now. This is being recorded on March 3rd. This is about a week into a Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And one of the most dramatic things that has happened for anyone who may be listening to or watching this down the road and may not have the historical context has been the Ukrainian president, when asked if he wanted an evacuation, saying basically, I don't need an evacuation, I need ammunition. And literally being there with his country people under fire, doing social media posts from buildings that are bombed out every day.
Right.
And I find that interesting from a gender perspective because, A, he's Jewish, and there are stereotypes about Jewish people not necessarily being as quote unquote masculine or being softer or more, whatever, all these other things that are total BS.
Right.
B, because he was an actor, which isn't necessarily viewed as the most masculine or brave of professions. C, because he's not physically imposing at all. I saw videos of him next to his advisors. He's like head and shoulder smaller than him. Right. Finally, we have a physically small ex-actor leading a smaller country in the streets while his country is being bombed, in contrast with the Russian leader, who is well known for photographs and videos of himself shooting bears, being on top of horses without his shirt on, his chest shaved and his pecs gloriously out there for everyone to see. I was in an airport in Moscow once. They were selling massive T-shirts of that in all the shops there. And,
right.
And at the same time, in a palace, not out there with his troops. Different visions and different versions of masculinity. You don't have to comment if you're not comfortable with everything that I just said. I'm just spouting that.
Oh,
but
I'm definitely comfortable. So
yeah, but I'm curious because you're choosing. I don't know whether you realize it or not, but I would argue that by putting out here that your avatar is Selene, you're making a stance about masculinity itself.
I think you do have a good point. When it comes to masculine and feminine, and I've said this to folks before, any kind of generalization or stereotype is just an average. If you know anything about math, the average doesn't get you anywhere near the top or the bottom. And so when we use generalizations and stereotypes, we don't get to see the best of the best, and then we never get to help the people who need it the most. And so for me, I try to not worry about that kind of stuff, because when you talk about, the stereotypical shaved chest showing his pecs and stuff, if that's the average, then why would I be trying to put that out there? Maybe to appeal to a broader audience. But again, I like operating from the shadows. I don't care if I appeal to that broader group there. And as far as the Ukrainian president goes, I think is with masculinity, courage, bravery, that's not male or female. I think you know that very well. And when it comes to what's happening there, I think that statement is strong because he needs to show that strength. And strength also isn't male or female. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm definitely, that is a really good question. And it's a good point. But yeah, I do think sticking with averages, that's all you're ever going to get or end up with. So
you indicated that you, in our pre-show conversations, you have a passion for finding meaning within yourself. Yep. And I'm going to briefly turn to one of the underlying themes of this show's current season that we're in, which is the secret plague. The secret plague, as longtime listeners to this show know, is a plague of alienation. It's been hallmarked by the exodus, particularly in younger generations, of individuals from a lot of the large institutions in which people have connected to each other through the search for meaning. Now, the military, I would probably argue, is one of the last of these, what I call legacy civil institutions that has vibrancy left. But a lot of the other ones are either under dramatic transition or have altogether lost their currency. And the ones that have lost currency altogether in the popular dynamic, again, are some of the legacy civic involvement organizations, or they've lost credibility, like political engagement, or, even religious institutions have been infected by this. Talk to us a little bit about what a passion for finding meaning within yourself represents and how that relates to inner connection.
So that is a very good question. And I tell this to everyone, this is what kind of works for me, but I don't know if it would work for everyone. I have definitely struggled with finding meaning in my life, even when things are going great, even when everything's fantastic, again, feeling alone. Uh, but finding that meaning can be extremely hard when you are in that alone area. I think everybody can kind of relate. And so what do? We will reach out on what we have available, social media and, Facebook and the things that are active. But if you can't write your own story and you get into social media, I think that's like the bigger narrative of the world, like the canonical what's happening. But I think we need to start writing our individual stories, because when we start putting so much into the social media section of it, we start to lose the basic thing that we're after, the purpose. We'll lose that because we're dealing with everybody else's ideas and everyone else's purpose. It kind of muddies the waters a little bit. So until you're comfortable with your own story and your own purpose and finding that, I'm not saying don't connect with others, right? But you have to be very aware of the impact that others' thoughts will have on yours, because it can change your direction. I like how you have this name, Purposed Highway, because a highway has many exits.
Mm.
And the second you get a thought, ooh, take this exit here. Well, you just pulled off the wrong exit. And now you're going to take a longer time to actually get to your destination, your purpose. I think social media is like thousands of exits. And everybody's like, ooh, take this one. Nope, not that one. Let's go back. And it's exhausting. We run out of gas.
Stu, what you just said really spoke to me. And it speaks to me as an extrovert. And I think that goes as to some extent, when you were talking about Selene earlier and introversion, you were talking about this concept of feeling alone inside a lot of times, even if you're in a crowd, which doesn't really happen to me, I will admit. But social media. One of the things that happened at the beginning of this year was on one of the social media platforms that I frequent, LinkedIn, because it's a professional social media platform. There was a lot of posts that were about all of the success that people had in 2021. I crushed it. I started a new business. On January 1st, I had 10 LinkedIn followers. Now I have 10,000. I didn't pay for any of them. And I was bankrupt in November of 2020. And now I just made 300,000 in 2021 and all this sort of stuff. I bought a new car and I moved into a palace and all this. And I'm reading this. And Stu, I felt like such a failure. And I realized I can't be the only person that feels this way. And so I decided to have a New Year's post that was a little bit more empathetic, that might be speaking to those that weren't believing that. And it wasn't until I had some conversations later that I realized that not necessarily everything I was seeing was even true, right? Or even telling the whole story. Talk to me a little bit about how someone like me, and it still kind of bothers me because I'm on social media. I promote this podcast on social media, my marketing schemes that I have for my signature coaching program and for my speaking topics. And yet I look at it and I kind of can't help but feel inundated by it, or feel like I'm screwing up, or I'm this, or I'm failing. Yep. What do you recommend people do in order to avoid that outside of shutting it off altogether?
Well, shutting it off altogether can be bad too, because now I'm like by myself over here. I mean, what would you rather know? The things that are going on in the world, like the nuclear threat from Russia with Ukraine and everything? Or are you better off never knowing that? I mean, I don't know. I asked myself that the other day, like, should I even look at the news now? Because whatever happened is going to happen. There's some Eastern and Western philosophy there, right? Don't plan for tomorrow because there's only today. But then you have more of the Western style of, well, no, you should probably plan. We need to plan things out. It's more in those wheelhouses. But I would say extroverts get a bad rap. And what do I mean by that? Y'all are kind of thrown to the side. Introverts get a lot of attention. Like, oh, extroverts got it. They got all this energy. But all extrovert and introvert means is the way that you utilize that energy. And I think that knowing that what you are. You shouldn't use it as an excuse, because anybody that goes on these social medias and basically those pictures and stuff you're seeing, that's the tourist pictures. Like, hey, check this out. You want to take that exit there, but that exit is so far down the road. Do you have the gas to get there? Well, I don't. And there's not a gas station in between. You're going to feel like you can't make it. And so why are we looking at the tourist brochures? We know where we're going. We know that we're getting off before that. And so my advice, and I give this advice to students when it comes to extroverts and introverts, and it's ride the lightning. And no, I know that's a euphemism for cocaine. Please, no drug use, right? Don't do that. And no, not the Metallica song. We're not trying to get copyright stricken here. But when it comes to that, we all have a certain energy, like a lightning bolt. And if you're nervous and you feel that energy coming, you can either let the lightning strike you, or you can utilize that energy. Extroverts, they've already got the pole out there ready to let the lightning strike. And, well, yeah, let me use the energy. Introverts, we just get hit by it and then we pass out. But at the end of the day, all that energy that goes through you is still going to exhaust you. So I would say focus on your story and your health while supporting the stories of others, because they can all happen at the same time. Everybody thinks that, well, you're either super selfish or you have to help everybody else. They can be a little bit of both, I think. So I think that's how we have to look at it.
Well, and you talked a little bit earlier, and you just dipped back into this, briefly a second ago, about knowing your own story and making sure that you're connecting with your own purpose and not letting the purposes that are behind what else is being put out there ultimately be your driver. So as an entrepreneur, as a professional speaker and a coach, for instance, it can be easy for me when I see all of these success stories from entrepreneurs, let's say in the sales space or the tech space, talking about, oh, I sold my business for $10 million last year, and now I'm going to start something new. Or I did this, that, and the other, to forget what I'm there for. For instance, and I don't want to make this all about me, so no. I'm just sort of throwing this out as a place for you to maybe jump off from and give additional thinking and perhaps even advice about it, which is, I read those sorts of things about instant, quick financial success, and people saying, well, Scott, if you wanted to be making more money now, or if you wanted to be developing a business that within 6 months could have 7 figures in this, that, and the other, you need to be framing your branding this way, or you need to be moving your brand in this direction, or you need to be doing this, that, and the other, and then you'll get to have all these other things. I don't know that that's necessarily what I want. One of the things that I feel is within my personal capability, for instance, is changing dialogue and discussion around a number of different topics. And that's not something that's as easily quantifiable on social media. And it takes a much longer grow, and I may have to be without during a certain ramp up period in that respect. People might not pick up on it or get it. And there might not be people that adopt a new idea anyway. How do then I stay in that pond and inure myself? How can I stay rich and connected to what my own story is and what my purpose is? How do I absorb and yet shut off?
That is a very good question. If we find the answer here, please, let's go get some money off of that, because I think a lot of people need that. But my life motto behind that, and I tell this to the folks that I teach too, is that, and I usually tell them in class, but you could relate this to life too. Life is like a comedy show. Sometimes you go out there and it kills, right? Your set just destroys. Everybody's laughing. They love it. But sometimes you go out and it's horrible. Yeah. Some of it's luck-based. Some of it's personality-based. But the second you watch somebody else shows and watch them kill it, to copy their material doesn't feel good. And some people are going to know. And it just, that takes away from you being the genuine you. And I think that if you aren't true to yourself, whether you succeed or not, you're going to end up in that bad mental state. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about, is what is your purpose? Because when I'm talking about your story, a lot of people's story, they will have like a pseudo purpose, I guess you could say. But along the way, it becomes either about the money or it becomes about the recognition or something like that. And that's why it's so easy for them to lose their purpose. If you can solely focus on your purpose, then everything else will either happen or it won't. But you will be able to say, I stuck to what I wanted to do through thick and thin, but that doesn't necessarily breed success, but taking care of yourself mentally. But see, again, that's partially me, because if I can't be genuine, then I'm very unhappy.
Yeah.
And if I feel like I'm taking someone else's, then it doesn't work. Sometimes even coming on this here with you, I hesitated because the things I talk about, again, I like operate from the shadows. I'll be like, well, everybody said this stuff before. I have nothing new to offer. I tell my students that all the time. I have to bring up my energy to come in and teach them, because what am I telling them that they haven't heard before, or that they couldn't get from someone who could articulate better than I could? But doing it my way and connecting with them that way, that helps me keep my mental health, for sure.
Do you think that purpose is something that we evolve into or develop ourselves? Or do you think it is something that comes from an external force, maybe God or the universe or the providential tapestry or something like that?
I like how you frame that question, because I like how you talk about avatars when you come in here. I'm of the mind that you can bring your purpose in. Your parents could give you that purpose. You need to go to college. You need to become a doctor. And some folks will latch onto that and they do it. Sometimes it's the environment, right? You can get into psychology and why do people turn out the way they do? But I think how you talk about avatars, I don't think it has to be this religious belief that pushes you there, but you could connect with something like Selene or like Helios and let that be your driving force. And some people will think, oh, well, that's corny or that's cheesy. Well, no, it is like a metaphysical type, it's just a feeling that you could get. And it's not that I'm out staring at the moon, naked at night, staring up at the moon, like, oh yeah, let me get all this energy from the moon. I'm not crazy. Like, I get it. But you can find meaning in the little things in life. And these stories from these ancient times, these are the things people were coming up with before social media.
Yeah.
It's how they were crafting their purpose. And history, we have done nothing but move up and up and up. And now we have at our fingertips just all this knowledge on all this mythology. There's something we can find to help push us to that next level. And I don't think it has to be something you believe in. It's just something that maybe you model yourself after. And I think religion's based on that as well.
Communication. That is a large part of your professional repertoire. And I find it interesting. I'm sure many people have already noted this as they have listened to or watched this conversation, that you are an introvert who has, as part of your professional portfolio, communication. Communication is something we haven't talked about on this show specifically, although it is actually at the heart of this theme of the secret plague, because it has been observed, and speaking about observations that aren't in any way new, right, that our ability to communicate with each other across political divides, across cultural divides, across all of these sorts of things has broken down. The focus has usually been on how we can reconcile ourselves with differing beliefs, not on communication itself. Talk to me a little bit about any thinking that you have relating to the connection between communication and larger social and cultural divisions that are going on in Western society, in particular the United States.
So when it comes to communication, and you mentioned it before, we focus a lot on interpersonal communication, talking to each other in the way that we talk to each other. There's a lot of postmodernists that would say that we craft our own reality, right? Like, and some people go so far and like there are no facts. right? There's no facts in the world because we can just create anything. What's a fact? But I think that we have to look at facts differently. I think objective reality isn't something that we can craft with words, obviously, but it is something that is up for interpretation. So when we discuss things with each other, I would use facts against you to prove my point. Hey, but we've all seen that classic picture where someone's looking at a 6 on the ground.
Yeah.
One person's standing on one. That's a 6. That's not. They're both correct from their viewpoint. But if you stand on the side and can see both sides, well, then now we can have more of a discussion to see, all right, well, let me scoot over a little bit and figure out what works the best. I think the problem is, especially, and remember, this is all my point of view. This isn't the Air Force's point of view. But when it comes to the United States, I think we are becoming immovable. Like, this is a 6. I don't care what you see over there. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm looking at objective reality. This is the facts. This is what I'm looking at. And we have to have facts to exist, obviously, because how would we ever decide anything? And when it comes to communication, language is important. There's a video game I played a while back called Metal Gear Solid 5, and there's a section where the villain, he has this giant speech, and he talks about how his village was invaded, and the first thing that happened when it got invaded and the soldiers took over was they made them speak the soldiers' language. They took their language away because it changed the way they thought. So America, United States, is this, and I don't want to say melting pot, but we have a lot going on when it comes to culture and communication and language. I think we need to understand that and realize that diversity is our greatest strength, but it comes with some issues, and not issues that like, oh, we don't have diversity. No, we need it. It's our biggest strength. But the communication issues that happen because of it can be pretty tough because I'm almost not even speaking the same language as you at this point. So when words mean anything, they mean nothing. And that can be a problem. And I think you see that with definitional changes just in the normal world. And when I teach my communication lesson, I talk about the word rhetoric. And I used to think that the word rhetoric only meant propaganda. I blame it on my Alabama upbringing, you know, born and raised in lower Alabama, my Alabama education. But every time I'd hear someone say the word rhetoric, I'd be like, ooh, propaganda. So when someone used it, I wasn't speaking the same language. And to a bigger point, when it comes to communicating with others, I felt this since I was a kid. When I was younger, I had a speech impediment. I could not say my R's.
Really?
And so when a teacher would talk to me, they would talk to me like I had a mental handicap.
Wow.
I didn't, but they would talk to me slower. Hello. And I'd be like, I'm fine. And they would actually, so this is back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so they would still use the word retarded to designate mental handicap, you know, before they moved on from that. They would actually call me that. And the thing that I hated the most is I couldn't even say the R word back to them because I couldn't say it. And so it used to make me so angry as a kid. They put me in the special needs classes and everything. And just by the way that I communicated with them, their perception, they saw something in objective reality. I'm sitting here a 6, but they saw a 9 and they put me over here. And I'm just over here. Well, I guess I'll sit over here.
And here you are, frankly, in academia today.
Right.
Well, I can relate to that. And I want to talk to you, maybe use this story and this shared bond for us to talk a little bit about communication and bridging cultural divides, because if there's any place where that may or may not be happening, it's potentially in the military. Now, there are a lot of the cultural divisions that people are most frequently, in my experience, latching onto or regarding to race, or maybe rural versus urban. I grew up in a ruralish area of Kansas. And my dad actually was from Alabama. He was from Selma.
Okay, all right. We don't hold that against me.
Hey, I've been there enough. But that as it may, you may relate to this. My dad worked for the state. My mother worked for a dog food factory. And I grew up in a community where those were the people that I hung around with. That's who I went to church with. That's who I went to school with, this, that, and the other. And there were certain ways of communicating that I would describe as, well, there were certain ways you talked that would get you beat up, particularly if you were a boy. Okay. So if I went out and was skateboarding with my friends or shooting hoops and, for instance, used a word like rhetoric, I was not do because I read books secretly. But the rest of that basketball game might not have been that nice, or kickball might have come right to my head. And and that was how I was raised. And then I went to law school later at Columbia University. And I remember the professors talking in a way, my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe they would talk like this. They had what seemed to me like this fake, not really British accent, but what I called a fancy accent. Right. And they used Latin. They would throw out Latin words, and they would use $5 words. My agent calls these words SAT words. I've learned to be a few of them out every now and then, like rhetoric.
Definitely.
Right. But it was at a different level. I felt, for the first time, utterly socially inadequate. I felt idiotic, and I felt utterly and completely socially out of sorts. I had never been in any sort of institution where the dominant markers of social class were expressed through language that way. And the way I normally might communicate also, I felt really would have had me looked down on. And I don't know that I ever really got past it. There is in my own outlook that wasn't there before. I'll be honest about this, a tendency to be hostile to people. On the one hand, I can relate to it. I adapted, but sometimes people that speak in a way that's too pretentious, or that I feel are like too much sort of throwing their fancy education or whatever around, I get hostile to. And I can't help but wonder whether some of the social and cultural divides that can sort of speak to, and how elite opinions about things separate, sort us, and divide, and sort of move further into what you're talking about with regards to the 6 and the 9, or inability to see beyond what our opinion is.
Right. I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head, because I feel that way too. Somebody comes in and starts like pontificating, like, what are you even talking about? Like, same thing. And because we have students from all over the place come in, you'll see the gamut of the different accents. And you mentioned the Air Force's or the military's diversity. I do think that as far as diversity and the way that we handle things in the military, like, we're the tip of the spear. I wish all of society could kind of mold around that, because when it's kind of been made mainstream, and when you make something mainstream, it's like you don't even think about it anymore. So sometimes we'll see something on the news and be like, why is that a problem? Oh, okay. Well, we haven't got past that yet. And it can kind of feel weird at times. That's why there can be a divide between even language with military versus civilian. We'll go out and we'll feel kind of strange because, and it's not that we're looking down on anybody at all, but it's like, oh yeah, it's mainstream to us, but it's like, we can see other communities still struggling with it. And to your point with the folks that were talking super fancy, right? I think that has to do with some personality as well, because I've done my best to try to get past that. You, obviously, with this Purpose Highway and everything that you're doing, you want to hear people's opinions. And if you think someone is trying to educate down to someone or talk down to someone, I bet that would probably turn you the wrong way. Like, no, I want to have conversations and have some good like discourse in here. And the way you're talking is kind of shutting that down or making people feel dumb. And I can definitely appreciate that, because those $5 SAT words, like, why are we using that when we could just say this word that works just perfectly fine and everybody can get it? So yeah, I think when it comes to that type of language, I don't really think there should be a big social divide behind it. But again, being from Alabama, and maybe you can relate with your father from being from Alabama too. My dad sounds like Boomhauer from King of the Hill. And when we go out in public, people, even in Alabama, people will judge him as dumb. Mm. And so from a early age with my R issue and with my accent, as you can tell, I don't have much of an accent now. Some words do, but I have tried my best to move away from that. And when it comes to culture, it can be a lot tougher. For example, my wife is Vietnamese, and we're talking about that cross-cultural talking to each other.
Yeah.
One of the big reasons I wanted a communication degree is because we have a wonderful marriage. So if you watch this, our marriage is amazing. I love our marriage. But in the beginning, right? If you have to say a but, you've already messed up. In the beginning, there were these communication issues because from her perspective, now she was born and raised in America. It's not like she was born in Vietnam, nothing like that. But she was raised in a Vietnamese household. When it comes to emotions and when it comes to saying things, you don't. So if I want you to do something, I'll just make a motion towards it. And for me, you need to tell me.
Yeah.
Tell me or I won't do it. If you're in the kitchen and you're banging plates around trying to get me to come in there and wash dishes, I'm going to be like, hey, what's all that noise in there? You okay? Okay, I'm going to go sit back down and I'm going to make you more angry. So that's the big reason I wanted to do a communication degree, because we all talk in different ways. And when you hear someone talk with those $5 words, try to get past that and learn who the individual is before making that generalization, so you only get the average from them, is really hard to do. Because sometimes they just won't let you, right?
But then you're right. Sometimes that's just who they are. You know, my law school first year roommate was someone that very erudite, much more erudite than me. And he's actually a lot smarter than me. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And he came from a family. His father was a law professor. And that's just who he was. That's how he was raised. And he never attempts to speak down to anyone. That's just who he is. And I did learn, and he and I are friends to this day. I learned to get past that. And I think he told me he found it refreshing sometimes the way I spoke. And that was a great bonding. That was a great bonding point. In a situation like the Air Force, are there lessons with regards to communication that you learn as you work with those that are going through the academy, with regards to communication, that you wish you could simply say to the larger civilian population, say, look, this is how we do it, people. Come on.
If we were doing it perfect, yes, but obviously we are still just civilians in a uniform as well. So I don't think we're doing anything much better. But and I use the word discipline, and I don't mean punishment. When I use the word discipline, I mean like the religious doing something over and over again. So we have that type of discipline where if you can't get into it, well, then maybe the military isn't for you. And then, not saying we kick those people out, but you kind of have to get with the program when it comes to that. When it comes to what I wish we could share with everyone is just our mainstream view when it comes to diversity, because here's two things that I think are happening in the world. One thing when it comes to diversity, people are tired of hearing about it, but at the same time, they're tired of it not working the way that they think that it should. So I would hope that, because in military, we talk about it here and there, but we don't talk about it as much as it happens in the civilian world. And when people bring it up, we're like, oh yeah, we do that. But it's so embedded in everything that we do. That's what I wish we could get out to the just United States in general. But at the same time, again, not speaking for the Air Force at all, we are just a product of the military that we are in. And we do our best, right? Because we have a lot of people coming from different places in the world. And if we can't get with that type of program, then, I mean, we're not going to be able to do it. So yeah, it can be pretty tough. But I love how someone can come in and they can express who they are. And while they'll get that judgment, I think you said it before, like, I don't judge people, but I might be judging them. We've gotten really good at, okay, I'm going to keep that to myself. I'm going to give this person a fair shake. and then learn who they are before I make a judgment. But are there still knuckleheads who do the not so great stuff anyways? 100%.
Well,
because people are people.
They certainly are, and I'm the first one to be the knucklehead half the time. Josh, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. And in fact, it has been so rich and we have so much to dive into that we're going to continue it in the next episode. I can't wait for that conversation. In the meantime, if you're listening to this or watching it, be sure to, if you like what we're doing, leave a positive review on Apple or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, be sure to leave us a positive remark too. We'd love to hear from you. I will see you, everybody else, next time for another trip down the Purpose Highway. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.